Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is an exciting podcast. I'm very excited. I've got two gentlemen here. I've got Mr. Will Tucker, Mr. Doug Haugen, is how you pronounce it, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. I was always saying Hagen. Doug Haugen. These men have very interesting opinions, very Catholic opinions, very insightful, not afraid to talk about things you're not supposed to talk about. We're going to be discussing, among other things, things to do with the elder brethren, the questions of the Jewish question, organized naturalism, Freemasonry, all this stuff that you like to talk about. But we're going to take a perspective, as we were discussing in sort of the green room before we came on. We don't need to, we can go into the conspiracies because that's always fun. But really, we're talking about something that is more profound than sort of trying to dig into the specificities and the particularities about this or that conspiracy claim. Many of them are true, but nonetheless, we're going to get to the root of this so-called problem of organized naturalism, Masonry, and even Judaism, especially in light of the recent USCCB statement that they're going to be putting pamphlets for not being an anti-Semite at Good Friday, which is just bananas. It's just absurd. In any event, before we get to that, gentlemen, why don't you guys introduce yourself? Doug, why don't you go first and give us a little bit of your background?
Yes, my name is Dr. Douglas Haugen, and I think Kennedy's going to mention the two books that I have that pertain to the topic. I live down here and teach down here in South Texas, and I do have a channel with Will Tucker called Dr. Deep State.
That's right, Dr. Deep State. Check that out. It's a great channel. You guys have done some good interviews with a mutual friend over at Vendée Radio. And I'll show your books in just a second here, so make sure people know where to get those. But first, Will, why don't you give us a little background about yourself?
Hi, I'm Will Tucker, a recent convert to Catholicism. I've been Catholic for about 2 years now, so please take that into account. I'm a collaborator with Dr. Haugen here. We worked on his new book, In Pursuit of the Metaverse, together, and I'm a frequent guest on his channel. And that's about it for me. My background's in art, I should say, so I think that informs a little bit of what we discuss.
You know who also had a background in art and is an incredible, esteemed, and valuable and estimable Catholic author and apologist? He was from England. You guys know which one I'm talking about? G.K. Chesterton.
Yes,
His degree. So I have a degree in languages. I speak Spanish, French, and Italian. I was not a practicing Catholic, or really, I was baptized, but I was just nothing. I was just an idiot, really, for most of my adolescent to my mid-20s. And so I studied those languages completely not from a religious perspective, just, secular universities and so forth. But then I found the faith and all that kind of stuff. And I really thought about, oh, man, should I do a master's, PhD? It's kind of cool to be called Dr. Hall. But then we started having a bunch of kids, thanks be to God, so I wasn't really going to do that. But I looked into Chesterton because he's my favorite, and he had a degree in fine arts. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to go back to school. I'll just re-educate myself through reading all this stuff that you read in the master's and PhD programs anyway. So if it's good enough for Chesterton to just have a 4-year BA in something unrelated to the faith, it's good enough for me. All right, before we get into this, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to just do a quick promo here. I am going to Italy this fall with Father Albert Kallio, a traditional Dominican who can find one. Well, we did find one, and it's going to be an amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. No trip to Europe is inexpensive, but as far as trips to Europe go, this is very reasonably priced. It's probably about $2,000 to $3,000 less for what you get than if you were to go on your own. So here's a quick promo.
With all trouble in Rome, it is easy to forget about one unshakable fact. Our church is the Roman Catholic Church, and Rome is the Eternal City. What a perfect time to go on a pilgrimage to the Eternal City and the other monumental sites of Catholic heritage in beautiful Italy. Join Father Albert Kallio and me this November as we tour through the shrines of Italy and the Amalfi Coast as we attend daily Mass in the Old Rite in the footsteps of St. Peter and St. Francis. Click the link in the description to register for this once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to discover the heart of the Catholic faith in the heart of the old Roman Empire.
Have either of you ever been to Italy before?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful.
No.
Now, before we dive into I'm going to pull up the information on the USCCB thing. I forgot both of you are converts. Do you guys mind giving us a little background of your journey to the Catholic faith? Whoever wants to start can go.
I'll do it first.
Sure.
Yes, coming on 2 years here. if you go back 3 years, I was a Protestant, not very interested in the Catholic Church at all. I wrote one book called Seeing Through the Singularity. This book here, In Pursuit of the Metaverse, is the sequel, and it's highly Catholic. And so the book itself and the two books together describe my transition. Will somehow found my first book and followed me. I announced that I was becoming Catholic on my channel, and it sort of busted the channel in the floor. But now I found Catholic people to come and fill the gap. And my perspective on the deep state and the war on reality that we're all facing is sort of front and center of what I do. And I think that the solution to the times that we're in is understanding the historical Catholic social order.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Will, what about you? What's your background to Rome?
Yeah, I forgot to also mention that I'm a special needs father. My wife, when she was pregnant with our first child, she just spontaneously felt compelled to start praying the rosary, and she converted in 2018. And I attended a Novus Ordo Mass with her for several years. We had never even heard of the traditional Mass. Until 2020, I felt compelled to convert. I was in RCIA whenever the pandemic rolled out. Went through a phase of disillusionment, dropped out of the church entirely. And then through Doug's channel, I started following along with him during COVID, because he nearly prophetically predicted all the terms by which the COVID pandemic was staged. And then whenever he converted, it sort of compelled me to look back into it. And I found a traditional Mass in my area, and so I was able to go through RCA remotely. And here I am.
That's excellent. Yeah, you both have this timeline of coming into the church kind of through the whole COVID stuff. And it's funny, for the longest time, like I don't know, I'm not a perfect man, but for some reason, when this whole thing started, and I'm here in Canada, so things were rough. I know you guys are in the southern states where it was a little bit better. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but, you had a little less nonsense. And I was here in Trudopia, living through this crap, and right away, and I was a school teacher. I was teaching in a so-called Catholic school system. And right away, and you said, Doug, war on reality, okay? And that's what I realized what was happening. It was a war on reality. It was, it was like living, I don't know, in like Idiocracy or something, where it's just, guys, what's happening isn't what they're saying it, and it's not even hard to figure out. It's not like a war somewhere and we're only getting snippets of, it's like, no, like we are alive in this place, and what they're saying isn't happening if you walk out of your door. We lost a child, sadly. We have 6 children now, but we had lost a child. My wife had a late-term miscarriage in November of 2020, and we're going to the hospital, and obviously, and for the operation and so forth, and it's on like the red alert and whatever, and like everything's overwhelmed, and I'm in there, and the place was a bloody ghost town, and the nurses, like, I have a doctor friend, he's living in the States now, he's a traditional Catholic, and he was telling me, he was hip to what was going on from the beginning, and he was pulling his hair out trying to navigate through the whole thing. And he's like, Kennedy, I've basically learned Spanish on Duolingo on my phone because I'm an ER doctor and nobody's come in because nobody's sick, Anyway, we could talk about that for a long time. I just want to pull up your books here quick to make sure everyone knows where to get them. I will put the links for this in the description box for this podcast if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, and also on YouTube, of course. And I'm going to pull that up here. This one here is In Pursuit of the Metaverse, Millennial Dreams, Political Religion, and Techno-Utopia. What a title. That's awesome. And if I can just click on your author name, I can probably bring up the other one here. There you go. Seeing Through the Singularity. And as you said, the first one is written as a non-Catholic, but it's not, friends, this isn't like, prosperity. He was a prosperity gospel, Joel Osteen guy. This is still deep philosophical stuff. He's got a great interest in political philosophy. So, all right, let's talk about this USCCB thing. So I'm just going to pull up quickly here an article from The Pillar. And for those of you who don't know, the USCCB, I love this word, pastoral. Oh my goodness. Giving us a pastoral note. So here's the meat of the matter. The new requirement was announced last year in a memo from the heads of the USCCB Committee on Divine Worship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ecumenical, of course, interreligious, why not? Notice of the memo was included in the Committee on Divine Worship's January 2024 newsletter, which noted that the conference has previously provided guidance on homilies and similar statement for the Good Friday Passion in the 1990s and 2000s. The goal of the statement, the newsletter said, is to help ensure that the proclamation of the Lord's Passion is not misused to promote anti-Jewish sentiment. The note on anti-Semitism, which is available in both English and Spanish, reads, "The Passion narratives are proclaimed in full so that they all see vividly the love of Christ for each person. In light of this, the crimes during the Passion of Christ cannot be attributed in either preaching or catechesis indiscriminately to all Jews of that time, nor to Jews today." We're going to talk about how that's not really true in Catholic tradition, and Will has some insight on that. "The Jewish people should not be referred to as though rejected or cursed, as if this view followed from Scripture. The Church ever keeps in mind that Jesus, his mother, Mary, and the apostles were all Jewish, as the Church has always held, etc., etc., etc." So essentially what they're doing is they're being encouraged, voluntold, that they're going to be putting essentially pamphlets or notes or letters or posters, whatever they're going to do, to make sure that everyone knows that Good Friday is not about being an anti-Semite. Who wants to talk about this first? Because I think we could both talk for an hour about it.
I'll jump in briefly. And I think this is the hallmark of an indication that there's totalitarian leadership behind this push, just because by definition, totalitarians like to play with words and definitions of words and not stabilize those words. So the term itself is very problematic. It's been changing dramatically in the last 3-4 years. In fact, every time I check. So the term itself, it changes so fast that what I'm seeing, new legislation, I think coming out of South Dakota, some man was just arrested in Holland for questioning the campaign going on in the Middle East. So these are trying times, but under that umbrella term, it's just that, and the fact that the Church would drag that term out and use it in this context is beyond problematic. So I'm going to flip over to Will on that.
Yeah, Will, what do you think about this?
Yeah, the equivocation, I think you're referring to the anti-Semitism term, but also, like, what is a Jew in this sense? The way that Nestor Tate is talking about the Jews are not collectively guilty for killing Christ, which is true in a sense, but also false in a sense in a typical Vatican II kind of way, where, of course, the Blessed Mother, the apostles, the Jews who accepted Christ as Messiah and Lord were expunged of guilt of original sin and of the guilt of deicide. While if you read the writings of the Church Fathers, like Saint Augustine, Saint Justin Martyr, and also Saint John Chrysostom, their homilies against the Jews, you'll see that it is a traditional view of the Church that the Jews are to be held collectively guilty of the sin of deicide, because they said that the blood be upon us and be upon our children. And so there's this playing around between, are we talking about the Jews of the Old Testament, or are we talking about this new rabbinic faith that's based in the Talmud, Kabbalah, and these man-made traditions that our Lord seems to allude to? And, I think, like, we have to have clarified in our mind the difference between earthly Jerusalem and heavenly Jerusalem, the Church as the new spiritual Israel versus, the carnal Israel, as St. Augustine would think of it. So, the two cities paradigm is something that we draw heavily upon in Pursuit in the Metaverse, the city of God versus the city of man. And I think that's epitomized with this distinction between, the fulfilled Israel and the carnal Israel.
Yeah. And also, guys, when you guys were talking about Fiducia Supplicans, and you were on one of your episodes and you were groaning about E. Michael Jones' take on the matter, and I think, Doug, you said, like, this is kindergarten catechesis, like, you don't bless gay unions. It's not a thing. Like, anyway, it's just like, why are we even talking about this? It's just, anyway. So, but this is the same kind of thing. It's like, recall what happens during the Passion. The crowd, which is Jewish, it's in Jerusalem, it's the temple, it's the city of the Jews. Like, this is the one they still want to have. This is what they're fighting about in the Middle East right now, among other things. And They're given a choice of Barabbas, and they're given a choice of Christ. And Pilate is saying, you get to choose what you want. And the religious leaders of the people, the high priest, the Sanhedrin, blah, 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 and the actual crowds themselves are saying, we want Barabbas. And Barabbas, sometimes he's portrayed, even in Mel Gibson's Passion, which is obviously a wonderful film, but even in that Passion, they kind of portray Barabbas as this kind of outlaw, crude individual. And we have no idea what he looked like, but he was a leader of a revolution. He wasn't just some common criminal who was, vandalizing property or something like that. He was a seditious individual who was working against, he was going for a very earthly, messianic kingdom of the Jews against the Romans. And they chose that. And the name Barabbas, Bar Abbas, it means son of the father. That's what it means. Ironically, I learned that from Cardinal Ratzinger, who was very ecumenical with the Jews, but he pointed that out in his book, Jesus of Nazareth, that it's Bar Abbas is son of the father. So there's this very distinct historical event that takes place where the Jewish hierarchy of the Old Covenant religion and the people there assembled for this public spectacle choose the earthly messianic revolutionary over the heavenly spiritual kingdom of Jesus Christ. This is completely lost. Perhaps you guys can comment on this, but this alone, this fundamental understanding, I think, is completely lost. What say you guys?
Will, you can go for it, Will.
Yeah, I just wanted to read from Matthew 29:29 here. It says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, that build the sepulchres of the prophets and adore the monuments of the just, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore you are witnesses against yourselves, that you are the sons of them that killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, generation of vipers. How will you flee from the judgment of hell? Therefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you will put to death and crucify, and some you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that upon you may come all the blood that hath been shed upon the earth, from the blood of Abel the just, even unto the son of Zacharias, the son of Barachias, whom you killed between the temple and the altar. Amen, I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them that are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered together by thy children, as the hen doth gather her chicks under her wings, and thou wouldst not. Behold, your house shall be left to you desolate." So I think what our Lord's saying there, this idea of collective, retroactive guilt, he's holding the contemporary generation of Pharisees and scribes guilty of the murder of the prophets, and likewise that the followers of those scribes and Pharisees who will become rabbinic Judaism carry forward that same guilt of deicide, which was the sort of the taboo that Vatican II most wanted to eliminate from church teaching. So here seeking the earthly fulfillment of a messianic kingdom. This is a very prevalent idea within Protestant theology of millenarianism that we deal with quite heavily in the book, and the amillennial paradigm of St. Augustine, that the church is the messianic kingdom in type and image of the heavenly kingdom that exists throughout the age of the church, as opposed to this progressive, either pre-millenarian or post-millenarian view that the Protestants introduce, which is a very Judaized view of a world to come, of a messianic kingdom to come, rather than, as St. Augustine says, we ourselves are the seventh day. The kingdom is already here in the church. And this echoes some of the misunderstandings of the early church fathers. So there's this ambiguity within the tradition that, like Tertullian and several others believe that there would be a future messianic kingdom, but they're also anticipating the coming of Christendom at the same time, in which the church has this, overtakes the Roman Empire, becomes the political paradigm of the world. I'll head over to you, Doug, if you have anything you want to fill in there.
I'm good.
Okay. So we also have to be very practical here, because, along with the Jews of the time desiring the death of Christ, it's also clear that our sins are why Christ is crucified. So yes, this is still happening today. It obviously, the sacrifice is a once and for all sacrifice, for you and for many, whatever is, said in the missal and things like that. Nonetheless, there is not a Jew alive today who does not intentionally reject the Messiah. It's not possible. I mean, maybe someone could say, oh, there's, let's say 20 million Jews alive today, maybe 19 and something million. 3 of them live in a cave and never heard of whatever. I don't know. I'm just saying there is not a Jew alive today in this age of internet, in this age of literacy and so forth, who does not know that there is the claim of the Christian Messiah. And then there is also the claim of the rabbinic understanding of what the Messiah will be. No one alive today does not make that choice to reject one and accept the other. This is simply impossible. And also, yes, the Catholic Church is against collectivism in this ambiguous sense of, all people are part of immutable groups, that no one has free will, and it's this is the errors behind what we would call a legitimate form of racism or bigotry, et cetera. So and so was born here, therefore so and so must be a jerk. Well, that's not true. Nonetheless, we do believe in hereditary guilt as Catholics. It's called original sin. We believe that when you come from a certain origin, that you can actually spiritually inherit this reality of a sin being upon you as part of a generation from a common ancestor. Okay? So we do, in some way, it's kind of like the predestination question. People will say Catholics don't believe in predestination. No, we do believe in predestination. We just don't believe in the total depravity, double predestination of the Calvinists who pervert the idea. But we do believe, God being omniscient, that there is this understanding of predestination of where we're going to go. So there's even more levels here from like as you were saying about the Doug, about the sort of weaponizing of terms and how we don't even know what they mean. In this idea that we're just going to reject that there could be a collective guilt on a people attached spiritually to a rejection of Christ, that even in of itself is a complete misunderstanding of what Catholicism even teaches about the fact that one can inherit guilt. We believe every single person on earth, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Catholic, Christian, whatever, every single person on earth, when they're born, because of the sin of the first parents, they do inherit a guilt of original sin. So that's, I think that there's even just a misunderstanding of what Catholicism even means about how sin can be inherited. What say you guys to that?
Well, I might say really quickly, by the way, Kennedy, I really enjoyed your presentation that you did there at the conference, and the central theme was to tell the truth. Easier said than done, but it's exactly, if we have to, the dilemma of our time is precisely that. So thank you for doing that. Your last presentation on the role of naturalism and the new mass or Freemasonry was also very important to sort of set up this conversation. Do we want to go the next level? And if we want to go to the next level, why? Because certainly within the city of man, there are no advantages to discovering anything on a layer below the stonecutters. So why do it? Well, we can kind of keep that open right now, but I do think there's a virtue to it because the church has always talked about it for each of the centuries since the advent of Christ. So the church thought it was important to understand it. One of the things I think we have to begin with, of our understanding of being Catholic, is the Catholic Church is the millennial age. Groups of Protestants put it out in the future, make it into some kind of city of man, things that have to be realized, a movement toward some time of utopia. The Catholic Church is the millennium. We as Catholics are Jews, true Jews,
yes.
Right? So what's going on here is that to some level, we're asked to kind of let go of our own inheritance. And the church is Israel. We are Catholics. And, we've always understood that. But in the 20th century, especially with the strong stream away in Protestantism, we've sort of absorbed this idea of being careful to even pick up on that language. So that's front and center of our own identity as Catholics and realized Jews, that's really what's under attack, is the core of our very identity. So when we try to wrestle with reality, there's a lot of parts that we need to put together, but we need to be firm and stand solid on our own identity. The church is Israel. We're living in the millennial age, and we are realized Jews ourselves. Now, other people, St. Paul would say that other people are going to make this claim. He would use in an earthly Israel sense in Romans 9 through 11, he would talk about being severed from this branch. And the conditions are more than likely, according to most church fathers, that they will be grafted back in. Mm-hmm. Now, Father Maudsley has taken 5 books to develop the idea that he's pushing out there, which is just wild to most. He takes the traditional Latin Mass so similarly in terms of its visual economy, or you might know it as a sacred economy, that how we perform this and our intention will change things. And I just kind of wonder if part of this is in reaction to Father Maudsley's campaign to, in some cases, simply not genuflect. I don't think anybody's going to be terribly offended by that. But Will, do you have any other ideas pertaining to that question?
Sure, yeah. The issue of original sin, I think, is really important, the way that you laid that out, Kennedy, because it's a source of a lot of Gnostic speculation to begin with. How do we inherit the stain of original sin, and how do we free ourselves from it through Christ? And also what you talked about with like collectivism, collective guilt, and that we don't view like ethnic groups collectively in the sense. And that's another way in which like defining what is Jewish identity becomes very tricky. Is it an ethnic identity? Is it a religious identity? Is it a political theology? And then how we handle the idea of original sin is very critical in like many Gnostic forms of speculation, like the issue of the fall, and why is the world in the state that it's in today? Why do we have to struggle? Why do we have to work? Why is there pain and suffering? The mystery of evil, etc. I also like the question of, St. Paul says, there's neither Jew nor Greek in Christ, right? That ontological distinction is unified in Christ when we all become part of the mystical body. So I think that when we say today, like, we're the fulfilled Jews as Gentiles, it's different than the way that we define what a Jew is in the carnal sense, and a political sense, or the ethno-religious landscape. So, like if we're talking about like an Orthodox Jew or a Reformed Jew, a Zionist, a Messianic Jew, that's a whole nother kind of category that's really tricky, that is very Kabbalistic in its thinking, but gets kind of a gold pass because it seems like it makes this inroads between this distinction. So anyway, I think what Doug was talking about with Father Maudsley too, this issue of the 2 brothers and the metaphor of human fraternity that's so important within, Freemasonry and the Vatican II, Nostra Aetate talks, is like, how do we imagine this nature of this brotherhood between the elder brothers and the faith that you alluded to, that John Paul II, actually he's quoting from a Polish Kabbalist named Adam Mishkowitz, who was a Freemason and a Kabbalist, when he used that term elder brothers. And I think in some interviews, John Paul II actually said elder brothers in the faith of Abraham, which is very, very tricky and not consistent with tradition. But, Father Maudsley points out that the nature of the brotherhood is actually one of enmity and fratricide, not one of, universal love and this sort of earthly kingdom of utopia that Doug's talking about. And I think there's this kind of bait and switch that's constantly going on around these definitions.
Yeah. And it's all very scriptural. Again, yes. And this is why these terms are so difficult. Like, I'm writing a book right now on modernism for Sophia Press, and I'm about halfway done. And one of the things I'm tackling in it is Pius X warns against this understanding of what we would call living tradition. And this term living tradition has been used in this age of modernism heavily against traditionalists, because they'll say, well, the church's tradition is living. Well, yes, the church's tradition is living insofar as the tradition of the church is transmitted to the faithful through members of the magisterium who are alive. Yes, the Catholic Church is the mystical body of Christ, and he's not the God of the dead, he's the God of the living. So Christ is alive, and therefore his mystical body with its tradition will be living. But that's as far as it goes. If the idea is living tradition, meaning that tradition itself continues to grow into something else in some sort of evolutionary perspective, then that's false. And if we don't have these terms properly defined, then we get into the weeds. And with elder brethren, yes, there is a reality of elder brethren, but as Father Maudsley points out, as you rightly say, it's Cain and Abel. Cain is the elder brother. So yes, that represents that the Jews themselves would kill Christ. I mean, the typology there is obvious when you take 10 seconds to think about it. Offering a lamb, offering grain, one kills the other because his sacrifice, Cain is the older brother of the Jews, and Christ is the younger brother, Abel is the younger brother of Christ, and so on and so forth. It's the Mass, it's the Old Covenant, it's the New Covenant, it's everything. I mean, it's the gospel, it's the whole Bible in 4 paragraphs or whatever it is, as many things in the Old Testament are. And so, yes, there is an elder brethren thing, but it's not a relationship of affection. And I'm going to read something here, and I think this will be a good segue, Doug, and we can talk about some of the themes of how this naturalism, the metaverse, this domination by these, whatever you want to call them, globalists, Masons, whatever powers, it's really Satan behind it all. And I'm going to read something here, which in context makes a lot of sense. So this is from Fahey. This is from a book called The Kingship of Christ, Organized Naturalism. This is page 50 for those following at home. And he said, the Jew, to be consistent, would fail in his duty to the Messiahs to come if he did not subordinate the interests of every other nation to those of his own. Where have we seen that, my friends? There is accordingly a vital difference of attitude which has its ultimate ground in the doctrines respectively held with regard to the Messiahs. What he's saying here is, and this is Logic 101, we believe as Catholics, we're supposed to believe as Catholics, Archbishop Lefebvre tried to hold this for us and many people reject it, we're supposed to believe as Catholics that Christ is King. We're supposed to believe as Catholics that every knee shall bow. We herald Christ the King. He will dominate the world. He is in charge, and Catholicism is the only true religion. It is God's willed religion. Therefore, no other religion can have any positive rights. It is impossible for truth and falsehood to have the same rights. We can tolerate, that's a matter of political prudence and so on and so forth, different question. But as far as positive rights, it must be the faith. So we want the whole world to be dominated by Jesus Christ because that's a good thing. And this is the city of God. But the city of man, wanting to have an earthly Messiah, if they believe, because listen, if you read the Old Testament and you take this, view of this modern rabbinic Judaism that, yes, there will be a Messiah, the belief is that he will be a world leader and he's going to be in charge of everything. And if you believe that, then you're going to want to prepare people to be under this world leader to be in charge of everything. And this is something that people just don't want to talk about. And so, Doug, perhaps you can maybe give us some links here as because I think this theme is at the heart of this domination of the intellect, this domination of the mind, which is at the heart of your work. Perhaps you want to springboard from that.
Wow, there's a lot there, but you really set it up well, Kennedy. It's a matter of, are we finally at a place where we can at least just discuss this? It's something that this church has been discussing every century. By the way, when you talk about Father Fahey, he took together, it's a consolidation of all of the popes throughout the centuries, and there's kind of just one kind of story of organized naturalism going throughout. So can we finally, especially given the the times that we're living in, actually just discuss this, especially if one of the purposes of this is to build a counter kingdom or even to attack Catholicism in order to build that kingdom. I'll give a couple thoughts. My background, I was really interested in the history of ideas, the rise and fall of empires. And I do believe part of the fog of war that's going on around us is that we are in the transition into a new kind of empire, a new kind of world, and a new kind of propositions about what is true and what is real. And it's a big idea. One of the ideas, there's a few interconnected ideas in there. One of them is that we are under a type of Gnostic thought virus that we're living through, and trying to speak about this and find a common language and find why exactly it is that we're talking about subjects like this even becomes tricky and troubling. Now, when I first put that idea of infected with a thought, it became kind of out there a couple of years ago, the woke virus. And I think anybody that traces back, where does this craziness really come from? Certainly you would agree with me, Kennedy, it tends to always come back to the concept of nominalism.
Yes.
And Mr. Occam. And so the skies fell down, and we're living, instead of I'll call this a Catholic project, which means, I don't know if my arm is in here, a vertical project. And the purpose of it is to be incorporated into the body of Christ through the sacraments and our oaths to faith. And that is part of what I would call the Christian singularity. And it has a telos. And the telos is, again, we're going to wait until the redemption of all things in the new heaven and the new earth. And we patiently wait. Part of our Catholic belief system is we are living in what we call an inaugurated eschatology. We're sort of the bride. We're patiently waiting. We've had the promise, and it's assured from God. And the term that Will and I developed in order to look at these transitions in empire, we pull from the sacred economy. We come up with a concept called the visual economy, because I think it helps us go from this turn of naturalism into 4 stages when it's hard for us to even find the language and the signpost, into turning us back into what the Catholic Church has always been about, bringing souls to heaven. And we get confused with the language and the signing in our proper reality. And sometimes I think it's the case when many of us think we're living in the city of God, when in fact it's a simulation of it. And that gets a little heady. I realize that. Right. So yeah, and so we have this project here I call the Christian Singularity, and that was even my first book. But now I see the component of the visible church changes everything once you get your head around that. So the Catholic project goes vertically, and there's an opposing City of Man project that's it's been developed most precisely as an antithetical and parasitic project, which is most realized in what we call Kabbalah. It's a very deep thing, but it has a telos. And it is attached to something we could call the Jewish project. The telos is a utopia. Now, I was very influenced by Norman Cohen. He wrote a book in 1957 called In Pursuit of the Millennium. And he really talks about this as a type of thought virus that comes centuries before even our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was on the scene. And his name's Norman Coleman. He's a Marxist mid-century historian. He's English. And just a fascinating work about developing this thought virus. And he just thought about it in cardinal terms. These people were oppressed, and their psychology they needed to create this utopia to overcome this condition that they were living in from ancient times. So he traces this millennial virus throughout the age. My take is that the metaverse is the realized version of this techno-utopia. In other words, the Catholic Church has it preserves the Christian singularity. The Kabbalah is about the techno-singularity. It's about a technological sort of a reproduction of the typology of Babel. Instead of everybody going to the Shinar Valley, we're all nodes in the machinery. Openly, people are talking about, whether it's TED Talks or many of the spokesmen for the World Economic Forum, where increasingly the world systems are being synthesized and being turned together, economic, political, and we're being openly told we're going to be part of this integration. Through AI, we're going to merge with technology. It's a scary proposition, but that is the antithetical mode and the final mode of Kabbalah and the Christian singularity. And I think that is the main thing. One thing I would like to finish on in my own life, just within the last 10 or 11 years, I've gone through paradigm changes. And each paradigm, for lack of a better word, Norman Cohen would call this a fantasy world. Eric Vogelin would call it a second reality. I use the word egregore, Gnostic egregore from Tomberg, and I specifically use it. There's a Catholic social order, and the further we get away from that social order, we create these second realities or egregores. And they, as St. Augustine or Father Rippinger would say, by the way, I want to give a shout out to everybody down in Tampa. I just was presenting my book down there. Amazing parish, amazing people. We learned a lot about spiritual warfare, and it was just wonderful. But yes, the further we get away from the Catholic social order, we're exposing ourselves to these mind demons. And eventually, it's not just going from Luther to Methodist to Jehovah's Witness. Eventually, it goes all the way to the woke movement. Eventually, the idea of this is destroying all things for its own sake, because you're so lost in this mind virus, we don't realize we're useful idiots for powers that we really don't even understand their telos or where it's necessarily going. So we don't understand how through our own sin and blindness, we're participating in our own destruction, the production of our families, tribes, empires that have been created, and everything else. So that's what I'm especially interested in. And I do want to say, when I go through these paradigm shifts myself, they're difficult. Approaching truth is difficult. The first one, I was given the grace to see the vertical and become a Christian walk. At that time, too, I entered into a learning about my friends there at Epiphany gave me the term the Jasons, the Jays and the Masons, kind of clever, right? I'm just going to say the Jasons. It's what I found. Becoming a Christian, the further you go into the paradigm and look at prophecy and look at typology, the more it's confirmed. When I went into Catholicism and looked out that Christ created a church, a visible church with signs and markings of the church, the further I go into that paradigm, it's inconceivable to me that I didn't see it as a Protestant. And likewise with the question of the Jasons, people are going to be apprehensive. We've been, as we say, biopolitically controlled through political correctness, not to go there, to not think about it. What I would say is the further you go into the typology, it confirms the other two. It confirms Christianity, it confirms Catholicism, and the idea of the brotherhood and the enmity that Father Maudsley thinks about is so important, because at the end of the day, we want to stay incorporated into the one true Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. The value of recognizing the enemies of the church and the enemies of ourselves should not be, and I found this the further you go, learning to have, when we're taught to love our enemies, to truly be able to love our enemies, the real battle is inside. I find the further you go from this, it just refines my faith, my path toward holiness, that the enemy truly is myself and my own sin. And that's what we're really wrestling with. So when we talk about topics like this, there are people, that can happen with anything, that everything's, you're a Gnostic, you're that, you're a Mason. And we do. And in Catholic social circles, we also have, I know a lot of your fans are Rene Girardians, and we get hostile toward other people that are kind of on our turf, and people that should, and it's wired into our flesh. So we have to bear in mind when we work through these paradigms, the goal should be to refine our faith and to refine our walk with Christ. And the true battle is with our own sin. But I've talked long enough there. I'm going to kick it over to anybody else.
Well, before I let you come in here, Will, because I know you have some thoughts, I was actually going to bring up Rene Girard and mimetic contagion. And I don't know there's a lot of great philosophers, but as far as a philosopher of this, let's call it the modern age, I hate the word modern in a sense. I understand why it works, but it's been weaponized to mean men are different now in their fundamental nature than they were in the past, which isn't true. Nonetheless, in this modern age, mimetic contagion, I think that's what we should rename social media as, mimetic contagion, this idea that you basically just get this mind virus that makes you go crazy. And that's what we're living through right now. That was COVID. That's all the stuff about the wars. That's every, revolution every 4 years with the electoral politics. It's just this mimetic contagion. And it does make us tribal. And the problem here you can tell this through the USCCB's words. People can go read the article. It's just a bunch of ecumenical, silly gobbledygook. And you can tell in their words, they're assuming that we are all under the grips of this collective contagion. They're assuming that because one points out facts of history, because one points out facts of scripture and so forth, it's almost as if they're assuming that we don't have the tools to think for ourselves, so to speak. We don't have the tools to be able to understand multiple ideas at the same time. And on the one hand say, and you mentioned praying for enemies, because what this does, this idea that we should associate, even if indirectly, Good Friday and the scriptures with anti-Semitism. Well, what the heck does this do for conversions? I mean, we're saying that it's basically anti-Semitic, ridiculously, to read the gospel. So, I mean, why would we ever want to have Jews convert to the faith if we think that the faith is anti-Semitic? This is the consequence of that. It's a form of self-hatred. It's a form of self-loathing. But it's also antithetical towards the kingdom of God, because why would we want anybody to convert to it? Which is so uncharitable. It is so uncharitable. And this is one thing when you read Father Maudsley's work. You know, he says, I read the Old Testament, I fell in love with the Jews. And what he meant was, for one, obviously the Old Covenant, the amazing saints of the Old Testament, that's an obvious thing. But also, if there is an enemy, if there is a religious group, ethnic group, whatever, that is in the grips of this falsity and this demonic influence where they hate the Messiah, Christ tells us that if we love someone who we can easily love, this is of no merit. So conversely, if we love someone who we have every reason on the natural perspective not to love, how much more merit is there in that than anything else? So a true Catholic is going to look at this stuff and say, man, there's some real problems here. This is some real dangerous stuff for your soul. I need to pray as hard as possible for the Jews. And that is the truest form of love. Perhaps, Will, you want to comment on this?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's a lot there I want to comment on. Yeah, I think recognizing the enmity is primary to the love, and I think I misrepresented there with the issue of human fraternity and the fratricide issue is that like it's both, one that calls for love and also one that calls for recognizing that there is primordial conflict between the two seeds. Doug identifies the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent within prophecy. And our Lord seems to be alluding to that here when he's condemning Jerusalem in Matthew 29. I just want to circle back to Kabbalah and Gnosticism a little bit.
Sure.
Talking about the immanentization of the eschaton, this Gnostic thought virus that sees that we have to bring heaven to earth through manufacturing prophecy. And this is largely what Kabbalah is about. And in Pursuit of the Metaverse, we define Kabbalah as Gnosticism plus Messianism. But it's important to note in Gnosticism as well as Kabbalah, there is no within Judaism, there is no concept of original sin. So what does the Messiah come to do if he's not to eliminate original sin? So it becomes this very earthly overcoming of the world. And I think this is something that's important to understand with Gnosticism and its view of being, of reality as a botched job and a false spectacle that has to be destroyed and surmounted so that we can forge this new age and this world to come in which we can become like gods. So there's a very influential book on Gnosticism from the early 20th century by Adolf von Harnack called Marcion, the Gospel of the Alien God. That one I'll read through real briefly. It says the Christian Gnostics took the concept unknown seriously. Their God, although the Father of Jesus Christ, was actually the unknown one. The connection of this God with the world has been completely dissolved. They were increasingly unable to relate the pure, good, and exalted God whom they found within their bosoms to the external world, which was so bad. Finally, the link is completely broken. The unknown God is not the creator of the world. Precisely for this reason, he is the unknown one. The attributes of God stemming from this inwardness as spiritual, holy, and good exalted him so high above the world that he could no longer be thought of as his creator and governor. In the same process, so here we have like the idea that the God of the world is the demiurge. In the same process, however, the world came to be utterly devoid of value, since not only all value, but all true being also is sought in the unknown one. The world became a prison, a hell, something without meaning, an idle fantasy, indeed a nothing. All these judgments are basically identical. The world has lost its right to be, so that the palpable fact of its existence evoked every conceivable form of hostile judgment and condemnation. The Gnostics, however, still maintained an important reservation in this connection to man, which possesses in his spirit a spark of the very being and life of the unknown God. The saving act of the unknown God, who had become manifest, could only appear as a fulfillment of a binding obligation, an act that only gives assistance to what is really the self-redemption of the spirit, that is, after all, divine, sicut Dei, to become like God through self-redemption. So the concept of the unknown God is something that figures heavily within Protestant theology. And you're talking about Rene Girard and this concept of the spectacle, mimetic desire, and the scapegoat mechanism, or what James Fraser has called the killing of the king ritual, which we have in Christ when he likens himself to the brazen serpent who's going to be elevated. So there's this confusion that takes place in the Middle Ages with the heresy of iconoclasm, which sees, all the stained glass and statues and religious art of the medieval church as being a violation of the second commandment. And so what we have to do is destroy these images of heavenly realities in order to bring about this invisible church, and it's Gnostic at its core. And this is, a very Judaized concept as well, the rejection of statues and the visual economy that the church represents. So like in the Catechism of the Council of Trent talks about how within the sacramental economy, the sacrament is both a sign and an instrument. And there's this capacity of the image and the sign to affect reality. But within this Gnostic system, we see, like nominalism, signs as being totally devoid of meaning and just being matters of convenience or empty tools, instruments that don't actually correspond to any kind of transcendent reality. So, and then what we have in place of that is this sort of debased ecstasy of mass media culture, in which we're constantly constructing these new spectacles, because the image, of the sovereign king of Christ is a metaphysical reality that we can deny, but it still resurfaces back through the logic of political theologies and through the logic of the spectacle and of, mimetic desire. So that's why, the spectacle requires blood because of the debt of original sin. And so that's why we're constantly watching films with, bloodshed, and there's this desire for flesh, the consumption of flesh within the image.
What's interesting? Okay, I wrote down a bunch of notes here because there was a bunch there, and I want us to talk about these notes that I wrote down. But before I do, we should talk about organized naturalism, because I don't know if you obviously know who Candace Owens is. Her story arc is getting a little interesting. She's getting a little bit spicy with some of the stuff she's saying. Someone on Twitter posted, and I've been off Twitter for Lent, but because I work online, I kind of every once in a while go on to see if I have a DM from someone about a show or something. But anyway, I just saw this tweet, and my friend said Candace Owens' EMJ arc is going to be wild. Anyway, I thought that was funny. I'm just watching this stuff. But she tweeted, you talked about the consumptions of the flesh, the debased ecstasy. This is pornography, right? And she tweeted, I'm paraphrasing, man, pornography's bad. We should probably see who's behind this. And immediately, from the blue check marks, we're all blue check marks now if you pay for it, but from the 100,000 follower media people, whatever, they started calling her an anti-Semite. And I thought, my goodness gracious, that's hilarious. But you can't hide it. Part of this organized naturalism, you have to get to these two things. This debased ecstasy. So you're going to have to find your religious experience somewhere else. You're going to have to be ecstasy, meaning taken out of your state. You're going to have to be taken into either a demonic spiritualism in the real explicit sense, which we find with these false religious practices. Okay, fine. Or you're going to have to be taken into a substitute for religious ecstasy, which is going to be obviously through the ways of pleasure, the 2-minute hate from Orwell. You're going to have to be taken somewhere where, your spirit, whether you understand that naturally or supernaturally as an atheist or a believer sort of thing, you're still going to have to be elevated somewhere, because the human person just can't live without that. I'm a huge football fan. I grew up playing football, grew up playing rugby. I coached both. I can't stand sporting culture. I love the sport. It's a guilty pleasure to watch the games here and there. But I understand the culture is absurd. It's a ritual culture. It's a culture of it is a modern form of the temple of the gods and watching the Titans play out their thing. And we have the flames and we have the music and we have the hymns and we have, it really is just a type of religious culture where we see this battle playing out in ourselves of good and evil, which we're supposed to be playing that battle internally. We want to watch it happen in the flesh because we need to satisfy that somehow, which is why football's so popular, because it's a perfect representation of it. It's an excellent sport, but when it's understood by a perverse culture, it's literally a war. And we want to watch this war. We need to see the victor because we can't live without that. So before we get to this topic of messianism, because I wrote down a few things here. I want to show how our culture is always looking for a Messiah, and we always need one, and we're always looking for the wrong one. And every single villain of history, every single supposed hero of secular history, all these men are messiahs, and they all fail. But before we do that, Doug, you talk a lot in your work about really what Fahey talks about as organized naturalism. Do you want to describe to us, because that's the underpinning of the false messiahs, the organized naturalism. You want to talk about this idea of organized naturalism for our conversation?
Well, what I thought was important when we're trying to reconstruct, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we have to, Father Fahey would say, we have to maintain the seeds of Christendom. We live in a world where that was backwards, but in terms of the visual economy, the glasses that God wants us to have on to see reality, that integral culture is the pinnacle of, I think, God's plan of order in the world. And so Father Fahey would lay out 7 different steps about what the God's plan is for order in the world, and then the devil's plan. And I think whatever happened, it's difficult. History doesn't usually go back that way. And Father Fahey realized that, but we have to have the seeds to work with from how to apprehend reality. So the force of organized naturalism, well, again, Cohen would say this, one of the central culprits, and he's not even doing this from a biblical perspective, would be this Jewish project, or we could call it the covenant project. Bear in mind that even Christ's own apostles, all the way, I think, until perhaps the Passover, really were looking for, and I think even after he even returned, they were still looking for a political Messiah. And yes, this organized force that's looking to create a worldly leader, a worldly utopia, we're pulled into that very much. We're a part of the spectacle, and we don't want to say it, but we're part of this demonic ontology, and we get sucked into this. For St. Augustine, he said it was very much a part of the amphitheaters that Christians were required to go to. The games themselves produced these ethereal spirits, and they became attached to them. And in Augustine's time, he said, you really truly can't baptize them. They're not truly prepared until they've expelled these spirits or exorcised these spirits. That has transposed into our own time, and we can see the craziness of the Super Bowl and reality television and every other crazy thing. We're asked to pull back into it, even if we just call it like the Marxists did, a consumerism, that we're in this wheel, and a lot of things sound churchy, a lot of things sound sciencey, but we long to be reconnected. We were made to be reconnected with the true spectacle. When Christ died on Calvary, he died, held back the hand of the evil one, enabling us to incorporate ourselves and keep our gaze upon the true spectacle of Christ. And the world, again, has pulled us into this ontology. And the role, I think, of organized naturalism is that it takes all these adherents. One of the fundamental psychological features of this would, according to Vogelin and Cohen, would be alienation. We're alienated from our ground of being. We're alienated from God. And so what we do is we pull others into our alienation. So we will produce a reality, i.e. Jerry Springer, or
Jerry Springer.
Put it over the top so you can't just claim ignorance. You're watching garbage. And we know that a known rabbi is, at a YouTube, and so yes. So part of what Kabbalah does is it takes you into the simulacrum. It wants to take that authentic reality and that experience with Christ and transpose it to everything that's artificial. And if we can customize it, just so you can have so dang many channels to pick from, and that it'll somehow be a substitute. But deep down when we search, we will feel that alienation, and people want us to get aboard of the alienation. And the alienation is the natural project. And one of the concerns Will and I am probably getting a little bit off track. There's going to be something coming down the pike someday when some sort of chaos hits and some solutions are forwarded. It'll be something like what's called the Noahide laws, but it'll be repackaged into something else. And we don't have to get into that. But as their ultimate theology, what they really need to kind of have this magic leap of being. This is an expression in Christianity. When we're incorporated into Christ's body, we make a leap in being because we're inaugurated into the millennial kingdom where we will find our destinations and live forever with Christ. The counterfeit version of that needs a singularity. It's not, the laws of physics are not going to allow this to happen. They're not going to allow machines to become conscious. So there's always kind of, when I say seeing through, what is the game? You're kind of throwing a lot of fairy dust out there and a lot of scientific terms, because all of these trends through organized naturalism get you on board with the alienation, whether it's the Protestant Reformation or us having to watch porno yet again, or the football game. It's this idea, it's this magic of self-actualization. Sort of everybody's had to maybe take a class with Maslow at some point of their life, that's the pinnacle of existence. You climb up the world's organized kind of steps of reality, and suddenly you have this vantage point that's unique to you and very few other people except the super successful people. That's the path of organized naturalism that wants you to bring you into this alienated existence. And I think when we kind of see how the signposts have been turned through iconoclasm, through nominalism, we have to come back to have a solid faith as Catholics that the traditional liturgy, I would say, especially in the historical or traditional form, is how we come back and we pull ourselves back to it. And it does require a lot of fasting on things we've been used to consuming. If there's nothing new here, we need to take the worldliness out of it. The warriors of worldliness are the form of naturalism. They've pulled the Protestants into this through the idea of rejecting Israel, the church. And the fact that we're in the millennial age, they'll put it out here, they'll put it over here. There's post, there's pre. There's movements right now that if you're an amillennialist, that's the traditional opinion, that you are an anti-Semite for just holding that. That would mean all Catholics, if you truly understand and hold the millennial view, that we're living in an inaugurated eschatology, and our job is to patiently wait. God promised he would come and meet his bride. So doing that, we're going to organize naturalism, and I can't blame them. It's part of worldliness. It's been there. But the chief agents of that have to destroy that visual economy in order to reconstruct a new one. If we can kind of see how the signposts have been changed, we can really come back and truly prepare ourselves for the Eucharist and really reconnect with the one thing that I think and this is mid-century, Valentin Tomberg would say this, he was a convert to the Catholic Church. It's the last hope of mankind. And part of that is us really coming back from the path away and reconnecting with the sacred economy of the Catholic Church.
That was beautiful. Worldliness. I talk about worldliness. If there's one word that describes, this worldliness is organized naturalism, but it's a term that's more accessible, let's say, because it's just somewhat of a colloquial expression. My wife and I talk about this all the time. So we have 6 children. God's blessed us with 6 children. Thanks be to God. Hopefully we'll have more. And we homeschool and all the whole sorts of thing. And where our battle as parents is 100% of the time protecting ourselves interiorly, because we can only give our children what we have. We can't give what we don't have. So if we're worldly, we're going to give our children a worldly life. Is protecting our children from worldliness. And this is, it's less in traditional communities because at least the priests, generally speaking, are hammering this home often in sermons and catechesis, and it's a very explicit, like, hey, this is bad, this is good. That's very helpful. It's virtually non-existent in the Novus Ordo. The Novus Ordo is worldliness. It must be worldliness. The idea, the impetus behind the Novus Ordo religion. And I say that, my friends out there who are my critics, we have to all admit that the crisis in the church is very much a mystery. I was reading from I'm not a sedevacantist, but there are certain sedes that I think have very great insights into things. And I was reading some stuff from John Lane, who is, if there is a reasonable stream of sedevacantism, I would say he's of the reasonable stream. I don't agree with him, but nonetheless, I don't think he's an idiot. I don't think he's not Catholic. But he was saying, wherever you fall, if you're trying to reconcile the papacy, if you're trying to reconcile sedevacantism, you're trying to figure out these things, the reason you're trying to do that is because this crisis is really a mystery. I mean, and Bishop Tissier of the SSPX has said this, if anyone is looking for a cookie cutter, simple solution to what to do right now, you're not going to find that anywhere, because this thing is a hydra. It's everything from the perceptions we have of existence to the bad philosophy we have about the nature of man to the disguised ecumenical terms that are weaponized against the faithful to this nominalistic war of words. I mean, this is a crisis on all fronts. But if there's one thing that we can identify where we can at least tangibly latch onto something where we can say, okay, at least I can do this, it's the worldliness. It's not even just in the lyrics of music. It's in the type of music. I narrated a book for Dr. Kwasniewski, who is a friend of mine, and I just love his scholarship on tradition. I just think he's wonderful. And I narrated his book, Good Music, Sacred Music, and Silence. And it's really a catechesis on Catholic tradition, but he uses music for it, and he does it masterfully. But he said, from the wisdom of the ancients, from all of the smartest, greatest people, both from the pagan, pre-Christian world and the Christian world, everyone from Confucius to Aristotle to Saint so-and-so to Saint so-and-so to scholar so-and-so, there is a type of music that is the music of the city of man. There is a type of music that will incite your irascible lower passions. In certain scenarios, it's okay. In the sense of, you got certain drum beats, you're walking into battle, that's very appropriate. But my point being is everything you have to protect yourself from this worldliness. After Easter, we're not going on vacation, we're doing a staycation thing. But I said to my wife, I'm turning off my phone. You're turning off your phone. We don't have a TV. I'm closing my computer. I'm putting it in a drawer. We have a home phone. Everyone we want to talk to, the 12 people that we actually do want to talk to, know our home phone number. And we are going to just sit in the mud in a forest. I don't care what it is, but we are just literally getting away from the technocracy that we live in, because you have to reset yourself. So I think that was super important. You brought up this worldliness, because it'll destroy your soul. And you're right. When you go to the traditional mass, the reason why it's so important is because it is clearly not of this world. It does not perfectly fit any age. It's ancient, it's medieval, it's neither, it's not modern. We don't even know exactly where it started, which is the point, because Christ's life is in obscurity before he has his public ministry. So the life of the liturgy matches the life of Christ. And when we go there, it is where secular and modern culture goes to die. It evaporates, and we go into the heavenly Jerusalem. And everyone needs that, and all we have are bad substitutes. Before I talk about Messianism, because I just talked for a while, Will, would you like to add anything before we get into that?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I could transition to that a little bit. I think, largely what's at stake here is the issue of mediation, right? Within Protestantism, the sola fide, sola scriptura is a claim against mediators. And St. Thomas's ontology is based upon this concept of analogy, the analogy of being, that everything exists insofar as it shares in God's being through a chain of likenesses, through mediators. And so what we have now is the self-referential reality, in which everything relates back to the spectacle. And the way it relates is through these kind of artificial conflicts and through this spectacle drama of bloodshed, basically, right? And so what it's trying to compel us to do is turn away from, through our own volition, from reality toward the false spectacle, and let that be the reference point. So what is the reference of all being? It's God. God's the guarantor in which all of reality moves and has its being. But within the spectacle, it's almost like this post-ontology or this anti-ontology in which everything is simulated and false and artificial. And the way it derives power is through generating tension and violence within its own self-referential construct.
Yeah. All right, you're exactly right there. Let's move into this idea of messianism. I think this will be the last sort of large topic we'll talk about here, maybe the next 15, 20 minutes before we sign off. So, inherent in this organized naturalism, whether in the Jasons, right? Whether it's in the desires of and you said covenant as well, which was super important because that's always inherent in a messianism. So, inherent in all of these anti-Christic, and people get upset at me. I said at our conference, and the one you were talking about said, in my litany of truth, where I said, hey, it's really fun to tell the truth. I'll say 10 things you're not supposed to say. And we'll have a blast. Everyone laughed. I mean, it's hilarious. The truth will set you free. It makes you laugh. It's relieving. It's amazing. And I said Judaism is by definition the religion of the Antichrist. And one of the Q&As we got, didn't have time to answer it at the conference, just we ran out of time. And it's like, well, again, this is just very simple. If you reject Christ, you're against Christ. Christ says, if you're not for me, you're against me. It's not a deep conspiracy thing. It's just how words work. But anyway, in messianism, we will always try to exalt these false messiahs. And I just had a list that I came through here as we were talking about this that are really relevant for our sort of historical memory here for those of us alive in this era. And the first one I wrote down was Nazism, Hitler, and the Aryans. Often this whole, sometimes there's a stream within the people waking up to the Jewish question, then they start to adopt these ideas, which are in and of themselves another side of the same problem. It's this idea that we have another chosen people that is only known by blood, and they have a prophet who's going to bring them to the promised land, and we can call it whatever, Lebensraum or whatever we want to call it. This is idea. This was another version of setting up their earthly kingdom, and it's no secret as to why they went after the elder brethren, because in their flawed understanding, they realized that there was a problem, and there was this rival to this natural kingdom, but they sought to reconcile that with obviously egregious means. We have in both communism and Islam, even though the idea of the messianic figure is not always clear, the messianic figure is the collective in both of those. In communism, you obviously have the people, the proletariat. These are the heroes, and as one collective body, we represent the salvation of the world from all its troubles. In Islam, you have the caliphate. And this is why they go so closely together. Of course, as much as I think he's hilarious, and I would obviously prefer him to over Joe Biden, because I would prefer having a broom to be president over Joe Biden, because he wouldn't do anything, which would be a good thing. Obviously, Trump is a messianic figure. Again, he's hilarious. I get it. You're in America. If you're right wing, I get it. I'm not here to hate on I'm not a never Trumper, but Trump is a messianic figure. I mean, literally, people are comparing him to like Constantine and King David and things like that. And it's like, my goodness gracious. And the last one I'll bring up here, in the church, one of the SSPX bishops, is the Spanish bishop, Galarreta. He said the four popes since the council, mainly. So you had Paul VI, who was the tormented modernist. You had Ratzinger, who was the modernist theologian. Now, I know Ratzinger was very, very, very conservative, but there's a lot of Hegel in his stuff, and Hegel is at the root of modernism. You had John Paul II, he called him the messianic modernist. And then you have Pope Francis, who's the incarnation of modernism. John Paul II, if you talk to people who understand Polish history, there was this stream of Polish messianism in the 1800s in poetry and things like that, rejecting these errors of communism and so forth, going to the extreme that there would basically be this great Catholic monarch who would be this Polish Pope. And, immediately after John Paul II dies, we are now supposed to call John Paul II John Paul the Great. That's insane. I mean, traditionalists know, but we're supposed to call John Paul II John Paul the Great. He was heralded. I mean, people think that John Paul II somehow single-handedly destroyed communism. I can't understand this, but it's because there's this messianic belief that he was the savior of the church and he was found in a person. We find this even in Catholic prophecy. I'm going to upset some people here. I don't care. I always upset people. But we find a vestige of this Judaized Protestant dispensationalism. We find it in the church, and it's called the 3 days of darkness. It is the Catholic rapture. It is the idea that there's the good guys and there's the bad guys, and Christ is going to come and pluck you out of the suffering because you're the elect and everyone else is going to suffer in this apocalyptic world. You can gussy it up with all of the private revelation you want. The 3 days of darkness is the Catholic rapture. Okay. I just upset some people there. And also, even this idea of the great French monarch. You know, I got an email from, and this is big in traditionalist circles, and this does not make me any friends, but again, whatever. I got this email from this French Catholic follower of mine. And she said to me, it's weird because in France, the idea of the great French monarch is not taken seriously because it's really just sort of this fringe private revelation thing that is not a teaching of the church. But outside the church, in the world where we've adopted all of these Protestant milieu about these messiahs to come, this dispensationalist nonsense, this whole thing that there's going to be some figure, he's going to come and he's going to save us from all our stuff. He's going to be a political hero. He's going to be riding a horse. He's going to have his rockets or whatever. And by God, we're going to have the reign of Christ the King because of this great individual. This is a messianic belief, but we already have a Messiah. Perhaps you guys want to jump in there.
I'll try it. I think this is a good way to end the segment. It's sort of like we could call it a thought virus of messianism or the egregore of messianism. And it is how all these ideas are coming into the church and I think affecting a lot of good people. And I know a lot of people get triggered about the stuff that you're talking about there. Will has probably more to say about this, but what I'll say, just a couple things to bear in mind as we live in the millennial age as Catholics. The church is the age. And again, that's part of our inheritance. When we kind of get distracted, be a faithfully await Christ in this time, and it's a slog sometimes. And the city of man, organized naturalism is going to say, here's something that's going to excite you. Here's something that's going to get you imagining and get your eyes off it. And sometimes these ideas of a dispensationalism are going to be repackaged in terms of apparitions or different Catholic prophecies. And I find a lot of them problematic, but I don't want to be entirely dismissive of them. But bear in mind two things. The apostles, a number of them, repeatedly say, in this age and the age to come, in this age and the age to come, in this age and the age to come. I think when we talk about this messianism that can't be separated from the millennialism, this bug that's been around for a long time, this desire to put ourselves in the place of God and, in fact, do the work of God. Now, so this age and the age to come, and just a reminder that Christ said, my kingdom is not of this world. So part of this great deception will be whether it's a Protestant or possibly some Catholics are going to fall into it. The Antichrist definitely, all of the church fathers agreed that it was a system, and they were kind of split whether or not it's also an individual. If it is an individual, I think a lot of people would fall into this Jewish project. You don't have to be Jewish to be in the Jewish project, right? So those are kind of my main ideas. I think the key one probably fell out of my head. But here it is. So this new dispensation, you mentioned the days of darkness or the good pope. And we should live our lives like that Christ could return at any moment.
Yep.
We should always be prepared for the end, that we are in fact living in the end times because we are in the church age. But I think we have to be on guard because I think these new dispensationalism, when people seem to enroll themselves in them, it seems to be I think there's a great concern, and I think it's going on right now. So I think, Kennedy, you described really well that that these battles are going on even as we're speaking right now, and which some of it gets kind of personal with people that we know, and I sort of don't want to get too personal about it. So I'm going to Will has some ideas, so I'll leave it to Will.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up.
Can I do one final idea? I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah, go for it.
Okay. So picking up on your show last time, we've heard about the Freemason level of everything, the infiltration in the 19th and 20th century. So the next level of it, you picked up on that early on in this show, Kennedy. One of the critical pieces of that with the idea of the Jewish project is that we're anticipating the arrival of our Mashiach, the Messiah, who, logically, if Christians were able to speak and think clearly, would be our Antichrist.
Yes.
But part of what happened with this movement, because it can both be an individual and a person, that the kind of the forces within organized naturalism, or we could even say organized Judaism, have made themselves the Messiah. Mm-hmm. So that's where this thing really gets touchy when you want to go there, because that's opening up something that Freemasonry simply doesn't speak to. It's simply an arm of this organized naturalism. And that's why increasingly, just like after the Bolsheviks took power, there's increasingly going to be more hate legislation, because in their mind, you're actually criticizing the Messiah when you criticize the movers and the shakers among this religion. And so that's what we're in for. And the final chapter of In Pursuit of the Metaverse is when Christ becomes hate speech, because Catholics of goodwill and, for example, however Michael interpreted this last document, there is a direction to all this, and it's hard to not see the agenda. And the agenda and the negotiation process within this ecumenical movement, there are free Masonic agents throughout, but what has been recognized, the key players in this are B'nai B'rith, which are kind of at the head of that organized movement, until we can kind of dare say something like this. And again, why do this? Well, yes, in the city of man, there are no benefits. You are not going to get magic hits, and the algorithms are not going to be pulled your way, and people are not going to be necessarily knocking on your door. But there is a liberation, which you guys just alluded to before, that is pretty important. So yes, when we think about these people themselves, and some of these people might be on the World Economic Forum and so forth, as this whole show is externalized, they're more and more going to want to be treated like the ideas that they have of themselves as messianic characters. Sorry about jumping on your lead here.
I'm going to do you one better, because we're going to let Will finish this off here, but World Economic Forum, it drives me insane, the amount of coverage that, and I get it. People are trying to recognize the problems. And I remember back during COVID and the World Economic Forum was getting all the press and all this kind of stuff. And I said to a group of guys, I said, guys, don't you see this is a distraction? Like, don't you see that this is like the small potatoes? I mean, World Economic Forum's bad, but it's like, it's a form of like umbrella cap, whatever. It's stakeholder capitalism. It's just a bunch of, anyway, don't you see that there's something worse than this? And you got all your energy and you're like, man, I've got to figure out every bloody thing Klaus Schwab has ever said. Klaus Schwab is a business tycoon who's got some crazy idea and likes to wear spacesuits. I mean, he's a dangerous guy as far as it goes, but this guy is not the head of the snake. You need to go much further than this if you want to understand the problem. Even with the vaccine, I'm not pro this vaccine. Everyone knows this, but there was a frenzy. There was an absolute frenzy that went far beyond what was reasonable to try to understand this thing. And I said, listen, you are being guided like marionettes right here, and they're taking something that is truly wrong, and they're using this as like the whole of all of where your righteous indignation. You're not seeing what's really being thrusted upon you, which is much deeper than this thing particularly. That's. I'll leave it at that, but I'll let you jump in, Will.
Those are both great segments there. I wanted to say I'm glad you brought up the issue of Polish Messianism and John Paul II. I'm preparing a presentation on that right now, actually.
Perfect.
I alluded to earlier with his quoting from Adam Mishkowitz, who was this. There's this whole strand of a Kabbalistic Polish Messianism during the 19th century, which actually stems out of Jacob Frank, who was a Jewish Messiah, antinomian, redemption through sin, false Jewish Messiah who converted to Catholicism as a way to rescue the sparks of the Shekinah, and all this sort of mystical Kabbalistic language. But John Paul II, there's some literature around him that's Paweł Roczka, I think is the name. It's Liturgy of History. It talks about the secret to understanding John Paul II's pontificate is to understand Polish Messianism. And he talks about the Jubilee of end of the new Pentecost of the new millennium that's coming in the year 2000. And that was his messianic mission, was to prepare for this year 2000. So, and, we all see the kind of apocalyptic events that unfolded after that. But yeah, I wanted to. He also, John Paul II alluded to Auschwitz as the Golgotha of the modern age, and we've talked about before how like the worst event in history has been transposed onto that event during World War II, and I think his efforts in Catholic Jewish dialogue were a large part of this shifting the ground of who is sovereign, who is the messianic figure. So that if you want to see the hidden hand of Freemasonry in the church, look no further than Catholic Jewish dialogue. If you want to see popes meeting on a regular basis with Freemasons, just Google B'nai B'rith, Pope Benedict XVI, B'nai B'rith, John Paul II, and you'll find everything that you need to know. And what are the terms? It's all about protecting the Jewish exception, the Jewish ability to claim the exception, which is important because we draw heavily upon this political theorist of the early 20th century named Carl Schmitt, who was actually a Nazi, but who was very influential for all the brightest Jewish minds of the 20th century who were working in the field of secular messianism that led up to become the Frankfurt School. So here's this Nazi who's a big influence on the Frankfurt School. And so his famous formula is sovereign is he who decides the exception. And he pioneered this field of political theology, which is defined by all significant concepts of the modern theory of the state are secularized theological concepts. And so the way that you recognize the Messiah within this framework is the one who is sovereign to decide the exception, the one who can say, okay, here's the interior of the law, and here's the limit of the law, and I'm the one who maintains that limit by being able to exceed and transcend the limits of the law. So what is the precedent for all other people doesn't apply to me. And that he calls that a secular miracle because it's outside of the framework of acceptable reality. So what we can see here with the USCCB documents and the type of sovereign rights that were claimed over the council by the Jews in the aftermath of World War II is a very messianic kind of sovereignty that's being enacted over the church. So if we look at Archbishop Lefebvre's, they have uncrowned him in chapter 29. This is what he says about the Freemasons. He says, I can still hear it. No more condemnations, no more anathemas. Let us all at last get along together. Freemasons, what do you want? What do you ask of us? Such is the question that Cardinal Bea went to ask B'nai B'rith before the beginning of the council. So here he's identifying the B'nai B'rith as the head of the snake, the super lodge that determines the agenda for Freemasons worldwide. The interview was announced by all the newspapers of New York where it took place. The Freemasons answered that what they wanted was religious liberty. That is, all the religions put on the same footing. The church must no longer. But here we are. We're going to the B'nai B'rith to announce that everyone's going to be on the same footing. So all are equal, but some are more equal than others. And then Abraham Heschel was one of the handlers for the B'nai B'rith in the Second Vatican Council, who worked with Cardinal Bea. He was also a handler for Martin Luther King, and what he identified as the central concern was this deicide charge that we've already alluded to and spoken about. So anyway, yeah, I think there's a seeing the messianic trajectory here that we can claim extra legal rights and we can claim a kind of authority over other world religions, and we can watchdog your religion and say what you can say about your own self and your own liturgy and your own self-contained spaces is the hallmark of a messianic action.
Yep, that's right. And I'll end here, and it comes back to what Father Fahey, it's a logical conclusion. If your Messiah is the wrong one, then they don't want you to have that Messiah. They want to prepare the way for their own Messiah. This is what you would do if you believed in Messiah. You want to have domination over all the other religions because you necessarily believe they're false. This is like they're just being consistent. It's not even a conspiracy. It's just what the thing means.
Right.
Anyway. All right, guys. I'm terrible at self-promotion. I totally forgot that I was supposed to tell people to sign up for my YouTube memberships and for my Substack. So if you're still watching, thank you. Do that. I don't think I'll get a strike for this video. Maybe they won't let me monetize it. That's just the way it is. So really do sign up for my YouTube memberships and my Substack if that sort of thing comes, ladies and gentlemen. You can check the links in the description box for this podcast if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify. All the information for the Dr. Deep State channel and for Mr. Haugen's books will be there as well. And I think that's about it. Anything else left to promote or anything like that on your end, guys?
No, I'm good.
You're good? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the comments, I might have to turn the comments off. We'll see what happens. Sometimes YouTube just turns them off. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you're allowed. And this has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless you all. Thanks, guys, for coming on.